What are we doing here?
Yep, why don't we get started? 6:30 something, so we're ready to go here. Who all went down to COGCC? We had quite a few that went down there with us on that trip. Okay. Yeah, we went down there originally with the intent of having an MOU that the county would work out with COGCC. And as we were presenting it, it became pretty clear that that wasn't the route they wanted us to go. And Matt Lepore was there, who was the new director of COGCC, and we point blank asked him if Elbert County should enter into MOUs with oil production companies, is that something that the COGCC would support? And indicated that yes, it was. They'd prefer us to go that route because they really couldn't enter an MOU with us on anything that conflicted with their regulations. So we tried to take a look at this and take a little bit different approach. The town of Erie has negotiated an MOU with oil and gas companies in their area. So what I did is I took one of the handouts you have is a memorandum of understanding. So I looked at Erie's. There's also an article that I passed out here. This article talks about El Paso County, and they are also looking at doing an MOU, and I believe theirs is going to their council, their commissioners, mid-November. So, Jill, I think you sent this to me last night via email. So I'm going to call them and try and get a copy of their MOU, what they're trying to work out, and see how it compares with Town of Erie's and some of the others that are floating around out there. We're hearing that some of the jurisdictions are starting to work on this. So,
just because my memory is failing me, at that meeting, did they say that if we had an MOU, they would enforce the MOU?
They said they would attach it to their Form 2 and their Form 2A.
Which are the drilling permits?
Which is
which means they're part of the drilling permits, but will they not say they would enforce it?
I kind of thought that
The impression I
would
got
help
is
us
that they
enforce
would
it.
help us enforce it.
Yeah.
That if we didn't have it attached to the drilling permit, then they would just follow their own rules.
Okay.
That's right. Yes.
Is that what you got out of it?
Well, I didn't get out of it that I got out of it that they would attach to the permit. But I kind of thought what they were saying about enforcement is it's your guys' problem. Mm-hmm. You know, in terms if there was a, and it's really the only question. I mean, as a general matter, you know, it seems like a good way to go. It avoids a whole bunch of problems as we discussed. And my only concern about enforcement is whether. I mean, you know, normally with a breach of contract, there's you know, your enforcement mechanism is damages, and how do you measure that? And now there's an alternate remedy that's sometimes available, which is kind of like an injunction called specific performance, where you go and you get a decree of specific performance saying, you know, you're in breach or what's called anticipatory breach of the contract, and you've got, and so that might be an avenue.
Was that? And I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to ask you a question. Is that similar to a cease and desist?
Well, it'd be similar to like an injunction. Okay. Now the thing is, and I just had I known we were going to be talking about this tonight, I would have done some research on it, because I don't know what the rules are in Colorado for invoking that remedy, a specific performance. They may be loose, they may be tight. I just don't know what the circumstances are. But that would be, as a practical matter, because a damages remedy isn't going to do very much for us.
Yeah,
because, you know,
is the memo even actual legal binding?
It's a contract. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And you know, and the consideration that they give, that we give them, the county gives them for the contract, is saying, we're going to let you. You don't have to get a special use permit. You've chosen to go this route. So the only question, you know, and as long as, because the draft regulation is provided for injunctive relief.
Right.
So as long as we have a specific performance remedy, you know, this would be a good way to go. If our only remedy is damages, not so sure.
How do you prove those damages?
Well, it's not a question of proving it. It just takes a long time and a lot of money, and not that getting an injunction is cheap, but what you really want to have happen if there's a breach is to stop it,
right.
Not to let the damage occur and then sue over it. You know?
Yeah.
I mean that's I would think. I mean that's.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of one, as I was thinking about this afterwards, that was the one kind of.
So maybe we could have some language added to this that gives it, that takes it.
Well, you might be able to, I'd like to get, I was originally thinking, well, before the next meeting, I'll go down to the law library and dig into some of this stuff a little bit. And then I got the draft of the regs again. I thought, oh, we're not doing the MOU. And then I got all the state stuff, and I thought, well, I don't know what we're doing. And then so I didn't want to do the work without knowing where we stood with reference, because it looked for a while like we might not be doing this. So.
Yeah, and I want everyone to know that we spent a lot of time on the draft regs, and I don't want to just throw them out. I think that if we can't get an MOU with the oil and gas company, there are certain things in those those draft oil and gas regs that we can use and apply during the special use process. As long as we're not in conflict with some of the stuff COGC.
We don't have an operational conflict.
Right, right. I saw this as one way to, hopefully get accomplished best management practices here in the county without, taking on the COGCC and the Attorney General. I don't know if we had the chutzpah to go after those two here in this county, I guess you would say.
Cojones.
Yeah. I was trying not to say that. So,
he's very polite.
So why did you stick the setbacks as an amendment?
What I did, I put all the best management practices as an addendum. The body of the text of the MOU just talks about and why don't we just, real quick, I want to talk about the two proposed methods. If you'll take a look at that. You have something, Colonel?
Well, two things. The other thing we have to take into consideration here is the draft COGCC regulation changes, because they do address setbacks. And so we have to consider the fact that what we do with setbacks, before they were kind of loose and voluntary. Now what they're proposing is not. And so we will be in operational conflict with them if we set setbacks. The other thing that will be in conflict with them about, well, there's a couple things. You guys probably haven't had a chance to see them. We went to a stakeholders meeting, and the three things they talked about was that. The other thing was our water testing protocol. The state originally asked operators to do well testing. It was not mandatory, it was voluntary. The changes would make it mandatory, which is both good and bad. It's good because it's mandatory, it's bad because they only ask for 2 water features. So if we
What
ask
do 2 water features mean?
2 wells, a spring and a well, 2 period.
Two
If we ask for more than that, once again, we're in operational conflict, so it's sort of a double-edged sword.
But I think that Southwest Energy thing that we just had here, it was pretty clear that as long as we don't reach too far, they'll agree to it in an MOU.
I think that was only, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think that. And I think that the only reason that they were as accommodating as they were was 2 things. One, it's the first one they did with the county, but they didn't want to rock the boat too much. And 2, that well is so remote that they actually went out a full mile and they only tapped 4 wells. So why wouldn't they? Why would they argue over 4 wells? But if you've got a well that's next to a subdivision and they're going to have to test 190 wells, I don't think they're going to be so accommodating.
Yeah. One of the things we've got to go back to the view of practicality. For example, if you have contamination of the water, which is going to be very, very remote, but let's make the assumption that you do. The contamination goes out radially from the well. So it's the wells that are closest to where you make the penetration that are the important ones. The ones that are 3 and 4 tiers back are not relevant because the first ones are going to be the ones that give you the initial. Yeah.
Well, also, if they're all coming out of the same aquifer, why do you have to test them?
They did include language that asked them when they could to go into a different aquifer. In other words, let's say on a well pad they'd already tested an aquifer, and it was more than 18 months, I think. No, 12 months. More than 12 months, then they had to go and they had to, or no, if it was less than 12 months, they could reuse that well test, but they had to do another one into a different aquifer. So they were
If only wells are
they weren't requiring it, they were suggesting it.
Yeah, but let's go back to practicality here. How do you test the water in a different aquifer if all the wells in your area are in the same
Well,
aquifer?
you can't, but if you can, they were encouraging them to do so. Rather than going into the same aquifer, if they had the opportunity.
You know, one of the
to go
things
there,
here that we have to get back again to thinking rationally, and on our ranch we just had 9 wells tested. Every one of them had methane gas in the water, and there's not been any oil and gas there. So it's going to be, I think, in the oil company's best interest to get that baseline put together.
But we have a baseline study COGCC did.
There are two things that occur to me. First of all, what I understood them to be saying at that meeting was, look, if you want to have an MOU that has stricter standards than
You can do
ours,
it.
you can negotiate.
Yeah.
If the company will agree to it.
Yeah, you can contract around that.
Yeah.
So that's the first
Yes,
thing.
if
So-
they'll agree to
If
it.
they'll agree to it. So the whole operational conflict thing doesn't matter in the context of this contract.
Yep.
And the second thing is, I mean, maybe rather than the sort of number of wells that you test, I mean, there has to be some minimal number, you know, and you know, I don't know how you go out radio, you know, what that has to be. But maybe you need to be looking at testing a certain, to the extent that wells in a given radius go into different aquifers, you check a minimum number of wells in each aquifer. I mean, wouldn't that make more sense than just saying test every single well within the radius?
On the document that you sent out, the 609 blue,
If there are oil completions in those other aquifers.
this is what they're suggesting they're going to make changes.
This is
Can
the
we-
draft COGCC.
Can we get changes, some changes made to this?
If you can submit comments before, I think it's November 14th, they will take a look at it. They said the sooner we can get comments in, the better. So,
Because I think that we could strengthen their segment on the well testing. You know, they say 2 if possible, and so there's a limit there. And then they're saying where multiple defined aquifers are present, sampling should attempt sample from different.
Right.
Well, let's just be more specific. You got to do 2 from each aquifer.
One of the suggestions made was that they change it so that there be 1 in each aquifer. You can make the suggestion. I wasn't, and by the way, I wasn't saying yay or nay or good or bad. I'm just telling you what happened at stakeholders meeting and the changes that are, the things that are different now from when we first started to look at these regs. The last thing that changed was that they talked about open pits. And they used to pretty much allow anything goes. And that particular change is a positive one in that they're allowing only freshwater pits, but it's a radial pattern. So you can only have a freshwater pit in what they call the buffer zone, which is 350 feet from a building unit. The exception zone. The buffer zone, which is I think 500 feet, or within 1,000 feet of an occupied, like high-density occupied building, or within 700 feet of an outside activity area. So you can't have a pit with chemicals in it, basically, in any of those areas. So those were the main changes that they made.
that's pretty
And
much
that they're
it.
proposing. It didn't make it's proposed. It just
So we've got 2 issues. I guess the first is you can try and influence COG.
And I think
Maybe.
that's probably
Yeah, good luck with that.
Most probably.
wishful thinking, yes.
But we can try. So the question before us is, if the COGCC is going to have regulations and we're in operational conflict with them, the only thing left is the MOU. And what we really should be addressing is what do we want in the MOU, right?
To deal with that.
That's-
yeah.
Well-
The other thing, real quick, Rick had mentioned that we can negotiate more stringent standards here for the county if we can get the oil producers to agree to it. But I don't think COGCC would enforce that particular one. They would leave that up to us to enforce that particular.
It's okay.
So that's fine. We can go out and negotiate and try our best to get what we need.
So in general, I accept Grant's opinion that, maybe radially closer to the well site, you can reduce the number of well tests.
No, I think further from the wells you can, but not.
Further from the wells, you can eliminate
Yes.
or reduce.
The ones close, I don't want to give that
No,
up for anybody.
right, no, I'm sorry, I misstated.
Yeah.
So is that, so we want to really address in our MOU what we want, what we think we can live with
Right.
for water testing, well
Yeah.
testing.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, and if
That's
it's
where we're at.
more stringent than COGCC,
So
let's
be
go out and negotiate, see what we can get
Yeah, see what
accomplished.
you get.
Yeah.
Let me play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
If, under what I'm reading here quickly, we have two forms of application process. One, they execute the MOU with us and they go pretty much on the express lane. Two, they don't, goes through the whole gamut
Special
of
use review.
reviews with public hearings, our planning commission meetings, and yada, yada, yada. If, now, given that they still, at the core of this, all of us, have the right to the minerals under the ground, and this is a property rights issue, then let's say they go through the whole process and we don't make things with them, they don't make things with us, don't we get sued anyway?
Well, and I mean, we're talking about land use regulations, and what we're saying in the land use regulation is you've got this special use permit thing. We can still require them to have a special use permit, even if they want to have even if they want to enter. I mean, they want to enter on a private property to have a minute, to produce. I mean,
Yeah,
so-
that's
so-
the gist of it, is that they
Yeah.
go on private property and do what the state allows them to. And the reason I'm, I just said, granted it without undertaking because if you remember, I mean, we spent a lot of time on this when we started a book, and now we're down to 2 pages. So this kind of tells us where we're going. So I think what we need to do is extrapolate down what the really important things are we're trying to do.
And that's
One is water.
yeah.
And I think the other thing that came up at the meeting the other night when we okayed the well, out way out in the middle of nowhere, was exactly what Carolyn says. These guys were, okay, because there's nobody around and there's no hardship to them. But like I was saying at the meeting, I think we need some triggers hard and fast so that we don't, if somebody wants to put a well in next to, next to my development, I'd like to be able to go through a little more process than just a checklist and a check and sign off on an MOU that they may or may not follow. And so I think maybe we should have something in there that triggers if it's within X amount of residential area, because we do have two definite sides of the county here. Out here, it's not that big an issue, but over there it is.
Yeah.
And so we really, that's one of the things we can control. So that's a surface piece.
So Paul, we looked at that and we said, look, in the MOU, this has to be ultimately approved by the Board of County Commissioners. So in the MOU, we made an attachment that included everything, like noise, buffering if you're in close proximity to a residential area. What we'd like to see is get that MOU approved, and then if it applies for that particular well location, we would check the ones that apply, but we at least have the MOU approved in its entirety, and we can pull things out of there that we need depending on the particular well location.
So you want a standardized MOU?
Well, there's two ways to approach it. We can say, well, here's an MOU we use when it's out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by a bunch of acreage. We could, and then we could do a separate MOU when it's in a more populated area. But I was just thinking if we can get all these approved by the Board of County Commissioners, we can check the ones that apply in that well situation, and you accomplish the same thing without sending them back through the process.
well, what are the, well,
I don't understand.
I had
He
a
wants,
question.
he wants to put the authority within the planning department.
Yeah, that's fine. That's
Well, the commissioners ultimately approve all.
They approve all of them,
Yeah.
and
You check the ones that
choose
apply for that
which
well.
ones you're
but
gonna.
doesn't the BOCC have to approve any given contract? If Acme Drilling Company comes in,
Yes.
and says they're-
And I think
okay,
what
so-
we do is put it on the consent agenda, or if people want to talk about it, we'll pull it off the consent agenda.
Yeah.
But make it a routine type thing after the first few that go through.
But I mean, it
the
certainly
process.
should be open to the public
Yeah.
at some point. So
Yeah.
I had another question
Yeah.
actually that's kind of broad in here. We haven't really had a chance to talk about this at all, Richard and I. and that's that a minor and a major. Are we going to put a major through the express
No,
process?
no. I think the
Well,
major needs to go to special
We
use
need
route.
to outline that, because I felt the same way, that a major has major land
Oh, yeah.
issues attached to it.
And
And,
it's permanent.
and it's usually permanent.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
think
more
that
impact,
with the facilities, or as we call them major, which I don't know where we got that name, but knowing what it is I think that that has to go through the land use
Mhm.
process.
Yeah. I think when you have that kind of impact on an area and the citizens, yeah, it needs a public hearing process to go.
I just want to kind of give you guys an idea, because I have been dealing with these oil and gas people. Their response to all of this is, why can't we just use the comment section at COGCC's website? So I guess what I'm saying is, don't make the assumption that they're going to go, oh, an MOU, yay.
Well,
That's
what we,
not-
what we tried to set up is an incentive in here that if you go the MOU route, about 30 days is what you're looking at, and you can start your operation. If you decide not to do that, we have to take you through the steps, and you're
No,
looking at 6 to
I'm really a
7
strong
months.
advocate of a checklist and a check, and the checklist includes the MOU. And it also includes any special circumstances, close to riparian areas, close to a school, whatever those special circumstances
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
And on that checklist, I would have a section that said special considerations, and then maybe have 4 or 5 examples of those things.
Mhm.
But the idea of going through a special use permit like we did last time, to me, it baffles me. Because it makes no sense whatsoever.
Oh, it was the only process.
Oh, I understand that. I understand
I mean,
that.
I agree. It was the only process we
And
had.
just so you guys know,
5 months
You and
long.
I
It's
are
insane.
important.
just so you guys know, currently what our special use process says is one sentence, and for oil and gas, and it says, oil and gas drilling operations. Such uses comply with requirements established by the Board of County Commissioners in review of the application. Pretty wide open there on what you can request, so.
You guys are the county commissioners, I guess. I don't know.
But that'll give us some leverage. Once again, going back to
Oh, yeah.
especially gives us what little leverage we can have. And
No,
once again,
this checklist and the check, or MOU, or however you want to describe it, it is pretty powerful.
And
Especially with the caveat that if we cannot, if the county department cannot agree to it, then we go through the full
Sure.
special use. And
Yeah,
then,
that's always a backup position.
well, that makes it have to go through 2 full public hearings.
Mhm.
And it also means that the public gets an opportunity to discuss it and all of those kind of things. Like this one out there by Agate, and contrary to what you think, there are some wonderful people who live out there.
Hey, what did I say?
Yeah, it's a drill in the county.
What did I say?
It's got our I-70 frontage and.
There you go. Anyway, coming back to it. Where am I going with this?
Is the Paris visa ever getting?
You guys wait, someday you're gonna say, yeah, hey, it's really changed. It's more than my word.
Yeah. Now it's all rubble.
Poor Ed.
Does the fast track application bypass the public hearing? Is that the big thing?
It is set up to do that, that's
Well,
correct.
well,
Except for the original
That's a big-
MOU.
well, no, but the individual contract will go before the
Yeah,
basis.
it would go before the.
So there's that.
There's still that part, right, they have to ultimately
If you go
approve
through the
it.
special use
Yeah,
permit,
And so people want to,
That's huge.
the public would have a chance then to make any comments or objections.
Very similar
Right.
to what a minor in the draft oil and
That's
regs
exactly what it is.
required. It's really pretty much the same thing. But
So-
in this case, it's an incentive rather than a requirement.
So what we did, if we could look over on the MOU document and then go to the appendix or addendum, what we tried to do is go through the regs and pick out what we thought were, what we heard from the group and public and comments that we've gotten, what are the best management practices that are important here. And so, I don't know how you guys want to do it, but we could go through these and just talk about them. There's not that many.
This 1,320 feet you got in here, what the state is 1,000 feet, or the proposed regulations is 1,000.
right now, it's 200.
Oh, I know. But what the proposed regulations are 1,000, is that right?
I didn't think it was quite that high. thought it was more like 600 from a residence.
I thought it was
Yeah.
You know, at the last meeting, people were throwing around, just make everything 1320. But
Yeah.
I think we had started that 700.
Yeah.
The only comment as I had up here is oil wells are drilled in quarter sections. So this puts it a full quarter of a mile back. So in many cases, it's going to be awkward for them to do that, just because a quarter of a mile up in the northwest quadrant is a long ways. Over where I am, you know.
But Grant, initially, it's going to be one per section, initially on the spacing requirement. So I was thinking initially we might have something a little larger, and then as we get more activity going, we can look at and see if these are the distances that are appropriate at that time.
As the spacing gets increased.
We say all of that. Well, one thing we learned from that meeting on Thursday is some of the stuff isn't Niobrara stuff.
True, it was
And that was
that other shell.
It's a Mississippi native.
Marmonton?
Marmot? I think that's what it is.
Marmot.
And that's, I think, what they're drilling all those wells over there in Lincoln County area.
That's kind of what they indicated, the ones they were working on were all in that same formation.
But anyway, 1320 is going to be one of those pushback numbers to the state regulations. And I don't mind trying to get it, but in a practical sense, for the first well, it's going to be no problem.
Yeah.
But if this thing does develop,
Get more activity. And
yes, it's going to become more of a challenge here.
But you know, once you establish the precedent of getting it in, you have that much more leverage.
No, I'm not arguing it. I don't have any problem with it because it.
I mean, I see your point, but there's another. It's not like we're without leverage in the negotiation.
Especially if they've agreed to it.
Well, if they agree to it, then
I mean, if they agreed to it, there's no issue, shouldn't be.
Yeah.
And I think, and once again, I go back to where we started with a book, and now we end up with 3 pages, so we better grab it while we can, because, or we can just default back to saying, well, the state won't support anything we do, so why do we waste our time? And that's,
So
that's not the place we want
you're
to
right,
be.
too, here, that's within 1 mile of the vertical part of the well, where that's written.
Mm-hmm.
That's why the state regulations, I think it's wrong, but it's.
Well, I was thinking about that. And our tangent circles. And the thing about that is, if they do a horizontal well, they can go 2 miles, but it's not economically advantageous.
Well, that's
Generally,
not
they
good.
only go a mile. So if you went from the wellhead and you did a radius of a mile, it would catch the horizontal part of the wellbore.
First one.
You see what I'm saying?
But-
First mile.
Because
Yeah.
usually they don't go more than 1 mile. It's not, it's technically possible. but
I used to think it was important, and I don't
It's
think
expensive.
the reason I don't think it's any important anymore is I went off and took up my engineering books and did a little reading, and the reason it's not important is if there is going to be contamination, the only physical place that the contamination can occur is in the vertical part of the well.
Because of the distance of the shell and the amount of shell.
Well, the only communication between the only place where there's any communication between the zone that is being completed or fracked or whatever is being done there is through the vertical part of the well. Because that's where your hole is drilled down, that's where your casing is, that's where your cement sheaths are. So
that's where the problem
and
occurs.
I was the one that wanted to do the circle tangent, and then
And it makes sense, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought, we're probably getting more complicated than we need to get.
well, it's a wonderful theoretical win for me, but on the other side, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and then you fought hard for that.
Yeah, I did.
You almost fell on your sword.
I did.
We had those tangents going and
Yeah, I
drawings and
thought it was
everything.
wonderful. But the thing is, when I went back and started thinking about it, the only possible place where you can get contamination is in the vertical part of the hole.
I understand what you're saying, and the research that I've done is that, and I've said this before, is contamination occurs through abandoned wells. And there are a lot of abandoned wells in our county.
One of the things that the Arapahoe County, they have an oil and gas planner. That's all she does. She's a geologist. And she said that one of the things she thought was important was that they be required to do, I guess it's cement logs on any abandoned wells to make sure that they're found, that are within whatever.
The problem is they don't know where they are.
Oh,
There's no record of it.
But
I
that's,
asked Tom Kerr that day when we were down there.
but that's not the problem. The problem is that the abandoned wells are full of concrete. And there's no way to run a cement bond log in a well that you can't get down into.
Is that true of all abandoned wells? Or is
Well,
that
if the
true
well
of
is
those that were abandoned
we're getting caught up in some definitional issues.
Right.
There's wells that are called temporarily abandoned,
Right.
which means that they haven't had cement plugs run in them. Because once they run the cement plugs in them, there's no way of getting into the well more unless you drill that cement out.
So if you required them to identify those abandoned wells and to verify and do the testing to the wells, you'd take care of the problem. Because they may not have it.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
You're saying you can't test.
So how, you could only do a visual with a camera to see if there's deterioration in the concrete? That's about the only way to look at it, or?
We would be trying to run, take the walking cane and poke it through a cement sidewalk.
Okay, probably wouldn't happen.
But that's a well, that somebody should be able to verify that that well has been plugged.
Well, here's
And then
the,
there's another temporary well that isn't.
when the well is drilled and if it is completed, by law, you have to run what's called a cement bond log. So, so if the well has at any time been attempted to be completed, then there will be electronic logs that tell you what kind of condition the cement is. And it was years ago, but I remember when I used to do that. Once you run that log in there, you know if you've got good cement or not. And if you don't have good cement, then there's all sorts of techniques you use to remedy the problem. One of the things that is very important here is in Colorado, by Colorado rules, that what an engineer would call the surface pipe, and that's the pipe that goes from the surface all the way through all of the freshwater zones, they have to have that cemented to surface.
To 50 feet below and to the surface.
Yeah, but the whole point is that the cement covers all
Right.
of the. Now, when they run the when they go down and drill down further, they don't cement that piece of pipe all the way back to the surface. They cement it back over some hundreds of feet above wherever they think they've got hydrocarbons, based on electronic tests that they run in the open hole.
I think it's 200 feet above that.
I think it is too.
So it runs from the bottom to 200 feet above the hydrocarbons, and from the top to 50 feet below the lowest aquifer. The area in between is not cemented.
Right. So the only issue that Rick's raising is that if there's an abandoned well that happens to be somewhere in that zone.
Okay, now
You
going
don't
back to that question, the only well that might be a problem, and I don't think it is, but it might be, would be a well that was drilled and no pipe was ever run in the well, because when they run the electric logs in the well to determine the porosity and the water saturation, the oil guy uses water saturation, but it's in an inverse relationship to the hydrocarbon.
Okay.
So,
Grant, can I ask you a couple of questions? Number one, you described this process of logging cement plugs.
well, what I'm talking about is you're logging the cement sheet that's between the pipe or the casings
Sorry.
and the formations.
And you're logging that to determine the integrity of the cement.
Yeah, you're looking for two things. One is you're looking for it being adhered to the pipe, and also that it adheres to the formation. Because if it does not adhere to the formation, then it's kind of like how we drill water wells in this county. It's basically an open hole completion where one zone could communicate with another zone and have circulation.
And then when the well is left, does more cement go in?
Oh yeah, when the well is left, what you do is abandon.
Abandon.
You take the well, you take all of the stuff out,
Right.
and then you go in and you put what's called cement plugs. And it's very scientific about what the density of the cement and all these kind of things.
And if that job is done properly, is it like will last in perpetuity or?
Well, in perpetuity is a long time.
As perpetual as anything
Yeah,
can be.
but yeah, the cement doesn't deteriorate. The only possibility, I suppose, would be an earthquake or something like that.
But
But
those are wells that are happening, reasonably sort of contemporaneously. But if you've got these abandoned wells that we're talking about, and these logs and the documentation of this process,
now the state tells you how to plug a well that's abandoned. So they take a copy of the logs, and that's kind of a term. There are different ones that measure the electrical conductivity of the formations, the porosity, the permeability, lots of stuff.
right.
And what they do is they tell you where to set the plugs. And what you do is, you don't have a continuous plug all the way from bottom to the top. What you do is put it over whatever zones they tell you to. And so any zone that has porosity, you'll probably put a cement plug across it. If there's anything that has a worry where there'd be cross flow from one formation to another, you would put a plug across it. And then you would also put a plug. The most important plug is the one that is across what we call a shoe in the surface pipe, so that there's cement in the bottom of the surface casing, which is cemented to the top, and there's some that goes down into the formation below it. And then above that, then they come and put more plugs all coming up the pipe.
But what Rick's talking about are wells that nobody knows where they are, and who knows what happened during their operation and during their prior to their abandonment. So don't we need some safeguard in place to test the integrity? It requires, you're going to be within a half mile of those. It makes some sort of audit or inspection within a half mile of wherever you're drilling.
You mean a surface inspection or?
Yeah, to determine where the
well, they can do that because they can go up with metal finders.
Shouldn't the seismic testing show that? Shouldn't the seismic testing show up any kind of old wells that pop up?
I've never used it to find wells.
One of the professors that I've been reading a lot about, Dr. Grafia from Cornell, he says that the mechanical integrity of all wells fails over time. All wells, 100% across the board, they fail at some point. So, and some fail quicker than that. So that's another thing that I'm very concerned about.
But let's get back to the issue. You're worried about fracking out of, I guess what you're worried about is fracking, drilling a new well, fracking out of that well into the well bore of some unknown well.
Well, where that well goes down into the shale, if that's never been recorded, and Tom Kerr said that the other day, we don't know where they all are.
So if you shoot wells for the last 50 years, they know what they are.
Well, when I asked him that the other day, he said, when was the well drilled? And it was in probably the early 40s, and no record of it. I've looked at the COGCC website. There's no record of wells where I know they were drilled.
Yeah, just so folks know that haven't been to these, we allow comments and questions, so just if you have something you want to add, just raise your hand, all right? Brooks?
Seems like you have a bigger problem, which is unless you're going to drill test wells through all the strata of water aquifers around these oil wells, you're always going to be penetrating all of the water aquifers. And out east, for example, you're not going to find people going down into the deep aquifers to pull water. You're only going to find those wells in populated areas. So you're never even going to have a means to test 2 or 3 of the aquifers in the region of most of these wells.
Well, at Agate, there's only one aquifer, and then it's pretty iffy if you go east of I-70.
Okay, well, how about between Agate? I mean, there are zones where you have 2 or 3 aquifers between here and Agate. So unless you've got producing wells in those lower aquifers, how are you ever going to know?
You don't.
Well, you don't, and that's why the COGCC said if possible. You may not have any wells completed into that aquifer, so you can't really.
So that's probably 90% of the available water you're never going to know about.
But let me just interject something. At the meeting we went to, we weren't there, 3 of us, they said that your deepest well in the county is what they would protect down to.
That's what they said.
And that deep well is the missile silo site. It's for this county.
That's probably true. That's
And
probably
if
the
that's
deepest
true,
one.
then we can hold them to protect the aquifers down to the deepest well we have in this county. That was the
Go
statement
on.
I'm going to repeat.
No, he did say that, they
Yeah.
protected,
Right.
and the going problem with that is that, that was a stray aquifer too that they found there when they drilled that, if I remember.
Well,
right.
it might have hit a stray aquifer.
No, I'm not arguing your point, I'm just trying
Sit
to,
down.
but I'm getting at,
What's a stray aquifer?
it's one that.
I got away.
Didn't show up.
No, it's one that is not common.
So it's not one of the four we all know about.
It may have been part of the bottom of the Laramie Fox.
But if it
When
went
it broke off,
down
it's its own
through
separate.
four,
Okay, I got you. It's okay.
then that's what they should protect for in our casing.
So it's a non.
But there is no practical way that if the well is unknown, that we have any way of testing to find out if it's plugged properly. There's just
You know
no.
what's weird about it? I don't doubt you, but I'm going to make a phone call because this gal at Arapahoe, she's not a planner. She's an oil and gas person. She came from the industry, and that was her suggestion.
To do what?
To do cement bomb logs for old wells.
I'm not a. No, you see, now we've got this definitional thing. You're talking about something different than what he's talking about.
I am.
Yep. What she's talking about is an existing well that has casing in it and has cement in it, and that's easy to do a cement bomb. That's no problem.
I wonder if she's not talking about whether or not COGCC has the bond logs from when the well was done. Is that what she's talking
No,
about?
she said the one thing that she would do different that she was not able to get the commissioners to agree to was a cement bond log for the old wells within some periphery of the
But
proposed
again,
well.
we've had this problem before. We've got language difference.
Old wells needs to be defined. Is that what you're telling me?
Old wells, because there's 50 or 60-year-old wells out there that are still producing. That means you can still get into them. Whereas the well was plugged, there's no way to go in there and do any kind of a bond log because the hole's full of cement.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'll make a phone call and clarify. That was the only thing she told me.
Yeah.
I wrote that down because that was the main thing she told me that she would do different. Although I will tell you that their MOU is pretty weak.
But
It's much weaker than Eric's.
There's no way to run a cement bond log on a plugged well. That's what you mean by an old well.
I
Unless-
thought that's what she meant, but I could have misunderstood her.
Yeah, you did. Because the only way to do that would be to drill out the cement, then run a cement bond log,
It makes
and then
sense.
plug it in.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
But maybe we've been too long away from this, but what I'm trying to figure out now as we're all talking about this is, if it is an old well that's there, and we don't know if it's been abandoned or not, what is this going to change where they drill and how they frack?
There is absolutely no way in the world that a well is capable of production, or a well that you're capable of going into doing your cement bond log cannot be identified.
Right, that's what I'm getting at.
Because there'll be something sticking up.
But then, if I understand correctly, the concern is abandoned wells that they don't know about? And then, but what is that, so how do we, one, find them, if we don't know about them?
You can't.
And then how does that play into where the horizontal play of the well that they're trying to drill then goes? Are they going to say, no, you can't drill that direction because I found an old
My
well?
guess is, and it's just a guess, but if there are wells that are so old that they're prior to the records, they didn't drill through the Niobrara.
They may not have. They're playing with our water. We're playing with water.
Why would they drill through the Niobrara?
Well,
No, well, wouldn't they drill through the Niobrara because
They didn't have the technology.
they didn't have the technology.
That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, but I think the point is though, they were at least, they went through through the zone of the aquifers. And
Well, every well would have gone through.
well, exactly. And there's a new well nearby that's, I guess, say within a half mile of that, of the class of wells, the blotter wells, of blotter wells. The frack, the chemicals from the frack, to get into that,
Okay, let's
migrate up and contaminate aquifers. Is that a dynamic you're
This is all folklore. Let's go back to the practicality of it. Is the new well will not allow that to happen because the new well will have good casing, good cement across all of the aquifers. In fact, when you go to frack it, it'll have at least 2 strings of pipe across the aquifers. So the only way that you can contaminate the aquifer, using your logic, is that when you frack the well, is that the frack would come back up vertically through not only the Niobrara or whatever zone you were fracking, plus the 4,000-foot Pierre shale, which is plastic, and then all the way up to from 8,000 feet to.
No, because and maybe I'm misunderstanding everything here, but you're creating these fractures.
Yes.
You're putting these proppants and the chemicals that they're suspended into them. That's not within, and you may be cementing, the borehole eventually, but all this stuff is outside. It's in the fractures in the formation that you got the production from. You're not cementing those.
No, you don't want to cement
No,
those.
So that's where.
But we're still not focusing on the hydraulics of the situation.
I mean, I don't expect the stuff to migrate up through all these different layers.
Well, then the only way it could get up there would be to come back through the pipe, through a hole in 2 strings of pipe, and a hole in the cement to get into the water.
Unless the fractured zone impinges on these, old wells.
Or if these old wells penetrated deep enough to be down into the fracture.
And close enough so that they don't. And they
it's an issue of proximity. If you're far enough away, it's not a problem.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is, and we discussed this in some past meetings about having some sort of, the half mile being sort of.
And if you go up to Weld County, where there's many thousands of wells that have been drilled there, and the production from that area are many decades older than we are here. This outcome has never happened.
Wouldn't the property owner know usually if there's a well or I mean, is there, most of the time there's something above ground? Like, Rick, how did you know those were there? Was there something visual?
This old man sold us our piece of property.
And knew the history.
He's gone now. He's gone now. But I was visiting with his daughter, who is a little bit older than I am. And she knows that there were 2 wells drilled on Bill's land, Bill Lake. But there's no sign of them now. There's no sign of those wells. So
And you don't
I would assume,
you don't know if they're 10 feet deep or
I assume that if they drilled a test well and it was dry or it wasn't worth doing anything to. So I don't know how deep it is. I don't know where it was, but she distinctly remembers 2 wells that were drilled. And if they frack in that zone and it ruins my water, then where am I? Where am I? I'm nowhere. My property is worth nothing at all because I can't afford to sue the oil companies. So keep the distance away from existing water. Keep the setback reasonable. That's all I'm saying.
You mean you have a setback from abandoned wells?
Setback from my water supply, from my well. Keep the frack wells away from it.
Well, you're talking about 2 different things. You're talking about your water wells, and you're talking about the abandoned. I mean, the riskier water comes from these old, holes in the ground.
Well, that aquifer is not far. It's not that far. I mean, where those wells were drilled, as my neighbor remembers, is not that far from my home. Well, if they contaminate, if they frack that, and that water, the pressurized water, the frack fluid and so forth, comes up through that abandoned well, it will get into the aquifer.
And so what you're really talking about isn't a setback from your well, it's a setback or some sort of distance requirements from these abandoned wells.
Well, that'd be nice to know, but like Grant says, you don't know where they are. Well,
Is that your worry is mechanically impossible?
well, I've seen pictures of it happen, Grant. I have a dozen articles here that.
I understand. Take me to a well here in Colorado where it's happening.
I have a lot of information here about contamination in Weld County. There's millions of square feet of land that have been contaminated up there.
So Rick,
Well,
are you suggesting that setbacks?
I'll show you the
I'm
article.
trying to understand.
Oh, are you talking about the desertification of the surface? Is that what you're talking about?
No.
Are you suggesting then that the setbacks, rather than being based on distance from boundary lines or building units, should be based on nearby wells?
From
Water wells?
water wells. From water.
Okay, and if that's what you're suggesting, what sort of distances are you thinking?
Well, I mean, everything I've read says a minimum of a half mile. I've consented to a quarter mile. And I don't know if that's going to be enough or not. How do you know?
Well, the regs say a quarter mile from a residence, which might not be a quarter mile from your water well if your well happens to be on the same side, of your residence, but you'll be close. So at that distance, does that feel safe? As safe as we can get
What
to
we
you?
suggested in the addendum here is 1320, which is a quarter mile between the wellhead, any residential structure, domestic well, or private building at the load. So we did put the quarter mile in there that covered the wells. Also, yeah.
Let me just go back to it. I don't trust my memory at all. That'd be the amount of notes in front of me. If they say they've got a case below the lowest well in the county, and that's maybe the Laramie Fox, then every well they drill has to be cased and cemented to below the Laramie Fox.
Yes, well, that's by definition.
That protects him and everybody else.
That's my point.
But only if we say that well in the missile site is the well that we're going to reference.
The benchmark.
Or the benchmark.
Now, one of the things.
Wait. I'm confused by that. You mean for testing or
No.
for cementing?
No.
It doesn't matter how deep any well in the county is. They have to cement 50 feet below the lowest aquifer. So whatever the distance is to the bottom of the lowest aquifer, they have to go another
Yeah,
50 feet.
you weren't at that meeting. What he's talking about is when they drilled the missile silo, they found a straight aquifer down there. So
And that aquifer is lower than the Laramie.
Could be.
I'm not sure if it's part of but it's lower than was expected anyway, but lower than the state match. So what they've done is they've used that as the benchmark. So that many feet below.
So they have to go 50 feet below that.
below that zone if it was there.
All right.
Not only 50 feet, but didn't we request 100? I requested 600 or 700 from you folks, as I recall, said maybe 150 in our MOU or something.
That's what COGCC requires, is 50 feet.
Right, and we want to go a little bit beyond that. All I'm suggesting is if that is the deepest well in our county, use it as a benchmark. And then most of the problems end up going away.
And the only thing that I'm going to, you got to understand geology a little bit. And that well is 20, the water there was about 2,200 or 23, I don't remember, it was over 2,000 feet.
Yeah, it's deep.
Okay, that equivalent zone in agate would be 800 feet.
I got that.
Yeah.
And so think of the MOU.
Yep.
You can go down 2,200 feet, or out in Aggie, you can go down 1,200 feet, 1,000.
Or at least go below whatever that zone
But
would be.
the negotiation is
Yeah, I agree.
It's site specific for
It's
where
very
the wells are.
extreme.
I agree with that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I want the what I want, and the oil company's going to do it because it's in their self-interest. All the known aquifers need to be protected. Absolutely.
And they gave us a gift when I don't think they really realized, because Tom Kerr mentioned the missile sites up north.
Yep.
He didn't think there was one down here.
Yeah. Which
So
is
he
interesting.
boxed himself in.
And it's also interesting because I just drilled a water well on a ranch.
Yeah.
And it was we drilled the well to about 700 feet. And the state water engineer made us log even the surface waters. And I think what they're trying to do is trying to get, I'm not saying this very well, they're trying to improve their water maps. because
Sure.
electronically, we knew exactly where the porosity was, and we knew electronically where the water was. Unfortunately, I had to drill 2 wells because I didn't go deep enough the first time, so. But
you're
so,
right, that's exactly
so it's
right.
interesting, they made us, in fact, it's, this is something new, because I probably got 50 or 60 wells scattered around, and this is the first time that they made me log the well, the water well.
You're right. We're trying to get
Richard, can we get back to this?
Yeah, let's continue on here on our addendum A. What we tried to do also is include the haul routes, the access points, have an agreement with our public works department on the roads.
Is that road and bridge, public works?
That would be,
Okay.
yeah, public works. It's now, it used to be road and bridge, it's now public works. So.
And in my mind, you're still the planning department.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. So item 3 on here talks about the various information we collect. So I think we pulled these straight out of our regulations, what we thought was important, and so we tried to follow that as much as we could. All right, item 4, that seems to be the best way to contain around tanks and separators and things of that nature.
I like the metal containers. Does the state, they accept either one, don't they?
Yes.
They do accept the earthen domes and lime, but I think these have been proven to be much more effective, I guess you
Well,
would say.
I don't know if they're any more effective, but they're sure a lot more tidy.
They look better.
They
I
don't,
know.
they don't collapse.
And you don't have
They
some
don't
kind of backhoe
erode,
run over
yeah.
them and cause a fault area in them. So.
Especially as sandy as our soil is out there.
And they
If
said
that's
they
all
had
they
no
need is-
problem with that requirement.
Mhm.
I don't, they're not, nobody's going to price on that.
And I think most of the industry is doing this now. I don't think we're going to have that much pushback from the industry.
No,
I really
when
don't.
we went up to Weld County, there was one of those places we stopped, they were putting up earthen berms.
Yeah, yeah.
But I would say,
Most of them had the metal rim,
Yeah,
steel
yeah.
containment around them. And most of the newer ones especially.
yeah.
Most of them.
What is on the floor of those things?
I'm sure it's lined with the same type of liner.
With
You have to have
clay?
something that keeps it from soaking into the ground if there's a spill.
Yeah.
I'm sure they have a liner just like they would in an earthen dome, it's just the metal containment.
The liners are much better than they used to be. They're thicker,
Oh, yeah.
and they use the process of joining it where instead of just overlapping like they used to do before.
They have some.
Use the weight of the liquid to keep them together. Yeah,
As long as we have adequate room, I'm pretty comfortable with this. And particularly when we were up there, we saw that most of the water produced, I'm talking about not, the produced water was being collected in fiberglass tanks. So, and so they're not even corrosive.
Closed loop, yeah, they had a closed loop system. Which gets us to number 5 there, we still kept that in there.
Thank you.
Except you say open earthen pits.
Yeah, now you understand what you've done there. You've got 2 different kinds of pits. And you mentioned the freshwater pits.
Fresh water and then produced water.
Well, produced water or drilling water. The state of the art in the industry today is closed loop systems. But that's really only refers to the drilling operations.
Mm-hmm.
And
Do people have, see, I thought about adding in here language that said only clean water can go in open pits. But then you get into this question of
What's clean?
water? What, is it just the pure water out there?
Well, they call it fresh water.
Or,
And my understanding from this morning is that fresh water is truly just water. It's not
potable
even-
water.
It's not even salt water. It's just water.
Mhm.
no. The Colorado Oil and Gas Commission,
Completion water is salty.
but maybe there's a salinity issue that goes with fresh water. The salinity of fresh water has to be less than, and I've forgotten what the number is, but it's got to be less than a certain number.
15.
The main thing we don't want to have happen is have these storage pits with clean water supposedly in it, and then have cattle get in there and get affected by it, or wildlife or whatever. That's what we want to try and avoid. So if there's a way to do that
Well, I think that what that guy from Southwest was arguing for was that, you know, when they, and I'm not supporting him or not supporting him, all I'm saying is what he wanted was harmless. And what he was wanting was a place to store the water that he was going to use for a frac, rather than having to buy a bunch of tanks.
Yes.
So that was what he was talking about. So that water is fresh.
And what you're talking about, they can protect from birds and wildlife. That's really not for me anyway. The question is the chemicals evaporating, the air, what it does to the air. But he wasn't asking for that. They don't do that.
But that's what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Is that,
Yeah.
So what we're talking about there is if they can dig a big pit, line it, and then store the water in an open pit.
And suck that water out.
They
for
suck
the
that
frac
water out.
process.
The risk is, and I think this is what you're talking about, is that they would use it also for the flow
Yeah.
back.
How do you
How do we know?
what's in there?
That's the problem. You know, I mean, by their own admission, COGCC gets to a site every 5 years. How would we even know if they were using that bond for something they weren't supposed to use it for?
Why do we even need to debate? I thought we said we'd go closed loop.
We did.
Period. No open.
We
pit.
did.
But we're talking about two different things.
You're talking storage of fresh water, but
Yeah, but I'm talking about.
let them bring in storage.
I don't have any problem with that. I'm just want to make. All I'm trying to do is be a translator. Is that what they were talking about in a closed loop system are completely different things.
But Carolyn's right. When we go out and negotiate this, we're probably going to get that. What if we just have fresh water stored?
Say no.
You know,
Well,
we need to be ready
the
with our
reason they're
answers.
going to make that argument is because COGCC has included it in their new draft regs.
That you can have it or you cannot
That
have it.
you can only have that.
Oh,
Within
Okay.
those zones
So
and
you've
buffers.
always been able to have open pits according to COGCC, but you could have any kind of open pits. They're now, in draft regs, are proposing that you can only have fresh water within, remember I said the exclusion zone, buffer zone, blah, blah, blah,
This is in
blah, blah.
our MOU.
Right, but I'm just saying that will probably get pushback for that reason. For that reason.
They can't push you around, Carl.
I'm easier to push around, to be honest.
Carolyn will send them through the special use review.
Just
Right go around, sure.
all right, where are we at?
So the next, okay, the number 6 here. All right, I put in, we heard from the industry and from COGC and some of the others that the pressure, you know, the vapor recovery system may not be practical initially until you have enough activity. But I also thought that, and I think I heard this at COGCC.
On Thursday, you said something else entirely.
Oxidizers. What about
Okay.
oxidizers?
All an oxidizer is a highly efficient furnace. So instead of putting out some level of particulates, you'll put out somewhat less. And so the oxidizer, I don't have any problem with. But I do want to counsel you is when you force people to electrify their wells, it's a mistake. Because you're better off to, until you have an opportunity to collect that gas, you're better off to utilize it rather than to oxidize it.
Use the natural gas to
Power your
propel the
engines,
drill rigs
to be, because what you want to do, in a practical sense, is utilize as much of that stuff in an economic way because it's better for the
rather than burning it off. Or,
yeah.
But I think that electrified equipment what pertained more to noise than it did to anything.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But on the other side of the coin, we've got to recognize also that there's a trade-off there. And the idea of trying to keep the noise down, I'm all for that. And
I mean, it depends on where you are. The well we looked at Thursday, nobody's going to hear that. There's nobody out there.
I'm going to hear it.
No, I don't think so.
You're
There's
plowing
nothing
through
out
the
there.
field.
I have honky cows. Get out of my way. I mean, it is so
my
real.
cows were shaking. I was like to go get them some value. But coming back to it, the best practices is where you want to stay with that. And if it's the best practice to utilize the natural gas in situ or in place, you're better off than you are to put it in the air.
Yeah.
And the idea of the oxidizer, I think that only makes sense. Yeah.
Did he Thursday night say something about small vapor recovery systems that they were testing? Did he? I'm not imagining that.
Now we've got to go back to, if you take the vapor off, but that's basically what you're doing, is you're taking the gas, the boils off the oil in the tank. That's what we're talking about.
Right. But But didn't he say that they, I mean, right now they need major infrastructure to do that.
My point is that if you take those vapors off, what you're doing is you're taking, what you're getting is some what we call heavier ends. In other words, stuff that's heavier than propane. Methane, I think, propane, butane, propane. So C5 pluses. Yeah, and so what you do is you're converting it back to a liquid, and then you're putting it back in the tank.
Right.
So as long as you have a sealed tank, and you have a truck that's sealed so that it doesn't boil off as you're driving down the road. So the best way to get rid of that stuff, and it's very valuable, those are the highest value parts of the natural gas.
Yeah, they hate burning them off.
Oh yeah, is to either re-inject it into a gas pipeline or inject it into an oil pipeline.
Can you inject that gas into a tank on site? And then have a truck come to it on a regular basis?
Well, the answer to that is yes, sort of. And notice how I defended it. There's natural gas plants all around this country, and what they're there to do is to separate the methane from the heavier ends. Mm-hmm. And then they have a truck that comes and gets those heavier ends, which looks like a propane truck, mm-hmm. and it's pumped into the propane truck, and then it's taken to some centralized facility where it's injected into a pipeline. Mm-hmm. So the question then becomes is, how do you get enough volume of it to make it work? And after you've got a few wells, then it becomes pretty easy. But the thing is for example, the methane and ethane, it's very hard to liquefy those things so you can truck them because their critical pressure and temperature is so high. Now propane, it's easy because it's a liquid at what, 30 degrees or something. But just so you know, is the methane is what you burn in your stove at the house, in town, not a garage or propane. So coming back to it, I think we wanted the best practices is, I don't think we should dictate that they should have to electrify it, but they have to tell you what the best use of that gas is when they give you when they apply for your.
Depending on its proximity to
yes,
population.
Let me interject again that there obviously should be a little tighter control in this MOU as they get closer to development. If you're a quarter mile away from one house and you've got your generator running off your top ends that are coming up with the oil, that's fine. But when you're that close proximity to an already noisier environment, then that's going to be more offensive. And one of the things, I'm not in the mood for fighting tonight, I didn't come this way, but I think if we go back to the beginning of why we sat here 6 months ago, started to talk about this, is for protection of the citizens of Elbert County. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line for everything we do here. So, once again, I'm still for, this is a fine idea of streamlining stuff, but I think there still should be, if it needs a trigger, in other words, where it is in the county and how many people are affected by it, then we have to have a little stricter set of rules.
At some point, noise trumps.
Yes,
I agree. I'm not arguing that.
Because I would rather be the one that has to deliver this to the public and then have a well set up somewhere up in the northwest corridor. And then talk about this, once it's done, and you live with it. And then you can be affecting property values, you can be getting all kinds of lawsuits from the private sector themselves, environmental issues and stuff, real or imagined. They all
and
turn
that's
into a lawsuit.
my checklist with the special
stop
considerations.
Yeah, but Tom Carrot at the same meeting has said exactly that they use the, I think it was the oxidizer
Yes.
in heavy density population. As you go out, you can flare or do whatever you want.
There isn't a separator, and the separator is what you use to separate the water and the oil and the gas. There wasn't a separator there that didn't have an individual oxidizer. You know those big black things with the screen on the top? Those were oxidizers.
Okay.
And it was interesting looking at them because you could see, and you can tell by the tops of them if they've been used or not, because were scorched. And you could see that I would guess that less than 10% of it had been used, but some of them had been used heavily.
So most of them up there were vapor recovery is what we
No, that's a separate deal. Vapor recovery and oxidation have nothing to do with each other.
But the ones we saw in Weld County, weren't there a lot of vapor recovery
Yes,
systems on
and you can
those?
tell because what they had is they had piping that come off the top of the tank.
Right. And you showed
And
that.
then they all went back to a common spot.
Right.
And where they were, and there was some kind of a pumping system where they were injected either into an oil line or into a gas line.
Yeah.
Because when they're in production, that is part of the product. What they're saving in the vapor recovery.
Oh, sure.
And so, but when you're drilling, that's hard to capture that.
Well, when they're drilling, I think we've got a language problem, is that when they're drilling, there's not going to be any. The only time that there will be some is when they complete the well and when they're flowing the well back to get the water off of it, and there'll be some gas that comes back with that.
So we try to put the oxidizer in as a solution in the pipeline.
So is the consensus that we need to add some language that defines what that threshold is? When we say you must electrify, and when
You're talking about
Right.
when you're close to a residential.
right, at what point does noise trump vapors?
The other thing to consider and a reason to electrify wells is because you don't have to burn as much diesel fuel, which pollutes the air too, especially in high-density
We've
areas.
got a translation problem again.
Okay, go for it.
And we're talking about burning the gas that comes out of the well. So there would be no diesel fuel.
But if they're burning engine compressors,
Well, I think what he's saying is instead of
compressors don't use diesel fuel either because it's too expensive. The compressors that always try, and then I'm going to word try because if I say every time, then I'm exaggerating. Always try to use produced products, and the reason for that is that if the oil company uses produced products to generate whatever they generate, they don't have to pay royalty on that gas.
And the thing is, I think, Rick, is that it either gets vented or they use it. So either way, it's actually better if they use it to run their equipment because they're burning it rather than that's the idea. I think, and it makes sense, except that it's noisier. So it's too close to density.
I think that we keep this thing to best practices, and the best practices in densely populated area or reasonably populated area would be noise mitigation would be very top of the list.
You just need to define what that is.
Yeah, and I would strongly urge us to do the general stuff and then have a section that's called special consideration. And that's, again, to take into consideration schools, traffic, migrations of birds. I don't know what it is, but anything that requires a little more attention. Noise is a very good example of that.
Well, or proximity to subdivisions.
Yeah.
You know, which is,
I get the impression that the oxidizers were noisy. I got the impression from that meeting that they were
I don't think they're noisy at all.
No,
basically burning.
yeah, we're getting different things confused here. They don't make any noise, except perhaps the
fan.
And then you're right, the fan, because the way you oxidize any hydrocarbons more efficiently is to get more airflow.
No, so I mean, I don't think it's a noise issue, and I know the COG, he said that in subdivision units, high density, medium density, whatever,
I think
they already require it.
And I think we should require it everywhere anyway. But again, we're not talking about the and somehow this is got confusing because what I'm talking about is an engine that's powering some kind of stationary equipment.
You're thinking of compressing and using it.
No, I'm thinking of a pumping unit that's out there that's got a little thing going around, or anything that consumes that gas in place. To me, is better than wasting it.
I agree.
But that's an option.
Diesels will run on anything. I mean, they don't need diesel fuel. They run on, right now you got fleets running on natural gas.
Well, you know, people that irrigate these big sprinklers, the best day of their life is when a natural gas line goes beside their place because that's so much more economic than using electricity.
So the stuff, the gas is coming up, which is essentially all white ends, which is a propane, butane, and everything else is made of. They run fine. They just keep peaking, but they'll run. So
You can run your cars on propane if you wish.
I know, I used to run pickups on it, so.
So where are we going?
Okay, so I
You're
think
putting
where
in
we're
your
going with this?
Where is it?
It's a matter of you putting it in your checklist.
Yeah.
Yes,
For
exactly.
those areas, you check that item, say that's important in this
And just
area.
call it a special consideration, and the special considerations would be proximity to something.
Define those, if
Noise.
it meets that, it's
Yeah.
checked.
Oh,
Yeah.
Now, let's take it in 2 bites. First off, I like this amendment A, and I think it covers all the main stuff. We made a lot lengthier when we were ready.
We boiled it down a lot.
No, this is, I'm cool with this.
And so I agree. And then the other issue, or B, would be to find what is that magic number where triggering for more
A circle
stricter
turning state.
regulations.
I don't think we can do that.
And then how do we
Well, I don't know, you have to have a magic number.
was to base it not so much on what MOU they be signing off from, but if it was within a certain distance from development, then we'd have to go through the whole process. So there'd be a lot of eyes years on it.
In that case,
And I think Grant's side is that checklist and check just makes it administratively a lot easier to deal
So
with.
you're saying you don't, okay, so you don't want it to be an administrative process if they hit a threshold of proximity to
Yeah,
density, is that what you're saying?
because once again, I'm trying to, think all scenarios in here.
Let's get some feedback.
And that's it. Let's get some feedback from the public.
Yeah.
So the question would be, that if you are living in the western part of the county and a high density area, and some operator wants to come in and put a well, would you rather that there's a way that they just have a checklist and a check process to go through, or would you rather have it open to public hearings? Even though they may be fruitless, nonetheless, it still gives everybody an opportunity to be involved in the process. And also, I think it's important that the public gets their opinions out there for any potential operators to see what they're up against. And usually, it's just like in development, they'll find ways to find a happy medium so they can do business. And so I think that the way to do that is, we have 2 processes here. Either they go through the checklist and the check, and because they've signed off on the addendum, and are going to use best practices and meet some of our triggers that we had talked about. But if they are within a certain distance from development, and we know what development is, Forest Park, Saddlewood,
I
places
think you have
like
a
that.
definition of plotted subdivision in there.
Yeah, it's already.
Yeah, okay, so there we've got it. So,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
they're at a certain distance of that, and they can't go through that streamlined process. They have to go through public hearing and planning commission and everything else. I think it protects the public, allows them to feel looped in and know what's going on, and has to say in this process. Because we do, it's the east-west syndrome of the county, which has been around forever. So,
I have to interject something though. I hate to rain on your parade, I agree with you in theory.
okay.
Y'all for a tax hike to pay for somebody to process all these? Because there is no possible way.
Yeah.
It is not possible. I cannot do it. Our department cannot process every well that comes within a certain proximity of a subdivision unless you're ready to hire 3 more people.
It's
Can't do it.
impossible.
It's
Yeah.
impossible.
And
Well, and what I wonder
It's
about
not that I don't want to.
as
It's
a
not
practical
possible.
matter is if you have if we have an MOU that has all the,
Best man.
sort of a column A, column B, different best management practices depending on, whether you're near a subdivision or whether you're out by agate. What difference does it make? I mean, the end result is you're going to have the safeguards. One has a higher level of setback requirements or noise requirements or whatever else.
Once again, I'll play devil's advocate too, and the differences between the checklist and the check process, the express process, and the other is that I, as a homeowner, may not even know it until it's there.
Oh, yes.
Well, no, you will.
Because they
Because
have to notify
And you get a chance to look
Well,
at
if
this.
I'm within,
a mile.
but what if I'm 2 miles away at the other side of the subdivision?
Well, one thing we've talked about in here also is developing that website. When we get an application like that, it goes out on that oil and gas website as part of this, so that notification does get out there.
Well, and the other thing,
And haul routes,
I read that all the time.
haul routes and everything else.
and the other thing is the MOU in any given case still has to go to a public hearing before the BOCC. Now, it might initially be a consent agenda, but if there are objections, you take it out.
You know, in our
It's
draft
not consent.
regulations, we included something I thought was really good, one of the best things that we came up with in the whole thing, and that was that if they have to notify one lot in a subdivision, the entire subdivision has to be
Yeah,
notified.
the wording I think we used is, if any part of the platted subdivision falls within the radius of notification, then the entire subdivision has to be notified.
And I actually like that, because I think that
How
people
do
get,
those regulations that we hammered out over the summer, are they still in existence, or do they go away in lieu of these?
I think what our plan, and you know, it's all about time, but was to go through and pull out the things that we can defend as straight land use, and probably incorporate them into zoning regs under oil and gas, and leave the things that arguably are downhole to the MOU.
You know, the idea of having a bifurcated set of requirements from one part of the county and another part of the county, I will argue strongly against it. And part of the reason is the history of the planning there. And when we first got here, you and I had a visit, and the first thing we talked about was this map that we had in our zoning and regulations, which broke the county basically into 3 parts. And if you were on one side of the road, you had a different set of rules than if you were on the other side of the road. And I think that that's completely wrong. I think that we can argue about being densely populated, lightly populated, or something else, but this is a county. And the county regulations should reflect the needs of the county.
And we did the master plan.
We did it for exactly that reason.
But this really isn't saying we're going to have, draw a line around northwest of the county, and that's one area. This more relates to what a specific land use is where the well is. Now, if you have
Right, I don't care if they're up your chaparral.
Exactly.
Okay, if any of those 5-acre or 7-acre lots fall within that 1 mile radius, they have to notify everyone on the chaparral.
I think that's the right thing to do.
No, it's just a question
I'm not
of
saying one part of the county.
what's your adjacent or your nearby land use.
Coming back to the checklist and the MOU, I think this is all handled where special considerations would come in. Noise, traffic, all of these kind of things that are, and to me, I'm kind of equating this thing to a PUD where there's a big part of that although it's subject to the county planning and zoning regulations, it's also subject to special considerations. And on the planning and zoning side, we've gone almost exclusively, and I say almost because I'm sure there'll be an exception sometime, but almost exclusively to the PUD approach. And to me, I see this as a very similar philosophical approach in that we have the broad set of circumstances that apply to everywhere.
And then the custom pieces.
Yeah.
And then the custom pieces.
Oh, here, Jim had his hand up to comment on that, so.
Well, just a couple of things. First of all, I missed your Jill for 7 more days, so just so you know, I'm Jim Duvall if I haven't met someone. Mr. Jill, come on, Mr. Jill. I think you could come up with a hybrid of what you're talking about, because I think you would get a lot of pushback from a number of folks in the county if you just whip this through consent agenda. I don't like that idea at all. I think a 60-day term would be preferable to a 4 to 6 month term, so you could allow for at least a public comment in there of some sort. I think you would be better served, to Paul's point, that you've got it, at the end of the day, you have to answer to the citizens of the county and say, this is not just a streamline, we're going to take every single one. And I think I'm agreeing with Grant on this, that I like the MOU with these special circumstances because the county is different, but we also have to have more or less the same set of rules But the rules that would apply up in the section of the county where we live, at 21 and Singing Hills, would be drastically different than how, you know, where the Moranvilles have their ranch way down in the southeast part of the county, and where you have your ranch and those kinds of things. They're just different implications. So I like the idea.
It may not even be different rules, it's just a different notification process.
Different notification.
I mean, it's been my experience in the 8-some years that I've been on the planning commission, and before that is untold number of years as a citizen, is that I like to know what's going on. And the last thing I want to see is something happen that I didn't have any notice of. And all of a sudden I feel like I've been bamboozled.
Well, the
We all
notification
feel like
that you
we're
have in
bamboozled.
here is a lot more rigorous than the state rules.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's,
That can
this is
60-day turnaround would require the elimination of at least one board.
So we're,
So you take it
so
only
for
before
the
the
60-day,
VOCC.
you were talking about for like a major oil and gas
I guess what I'm
facility?
doing is on this, you have, option one was a 30 to 45-day term.
Right.
I don't think it needs to be that quick, and what I heard you saying was perhaps that would not be put in front of the public for public comment, other than at the BOCC, but then if you use consent agenda, that's not public comment. So I disagree with that. I think you have to have these things brought up.
But you have
At least for the first X number,
Yeah,
until
maybe
it becomes
initially.
more commonplace.
But the thing to keep in mind is the public will definitely have, there will be public hearings on the MOU that we develop, so there will be plenty of opportunity for the public to comment on that. But I tend to agree, the way the consent
You mean
agenda,
the development process, but not case by case. Am I understanding what you're saying?
I think what Richard is saying, at least my position would be, everything that's going to be put out here has to go through a
public hearing process. The MOU that we develop, that will be Planning Commission, Board of County Commissioners, that will be published for people to comment on and send comments in.
Well, what you're saying is the initial one, not
The initial one,
not the one for well.
the master MOU kind of will.
Well, why not?
I don't,
Why
what Jim
not?
is saying, and he's right, is that if it's, what we're discussing here is a straight administrative process. And if they put it on the consent agenda, at least the way that the commissioners have been doing it, there's no public comment. However, I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'd like to see every single one of these go to public hearing, because I think it would force COGCC to start looking at some of the things that they're doing that we are uncomfortable with. But the reality is here, okay, and again, I'm not trying to be a jerk or anything, the reality is here, Arapahoe County is getting 5 of these a month. I can't do that. It can't be done.
So
it's not realistic.
Carolyn, we're not asking you to do every one because everyone wouldn't fall under the.
But we are. If we're talking about taking it to a public meeting. That means I have to prepare a staff
just
report.
if it's within a certain distance from
Well,
what we
I don't
want.
understand what's going
No,
on.
let me say one more thing and I'll shut up. And that is that if we're at the point we're so afraid of a little extra work that we make a decision that streamlines the process so that we find a year from now, 2 years from now, we have made a fatal error which kills the county, except for the oil producers, then we've been remiss in what we're doing.
Well, what's the problem with just treating it as a regular agenda item before the BOCC?
Put it under land use
Approval of
instead of
the
the
MOU.
consent agenda.
Yeah, and people come and take it off the consent agenda,
But you can't do it, make it a public hearing. It can't be offered as an agenda item in a public hearing if it's not on a consent agenda without being presented by staff. And it's not a little extra work. It's not doable. I can't do it. Period. I can't do it. If I work 24 hours a day, I cannot produce 5 of these a month. I can't do it.
The commissioners who are there.
I don't understand why we're still discussing.
another staff.
I think what you're saying is that everything that's agreed to goes before a public review. Period. The MOU, the regulations, and
Yeah,
all
no,
that.
but Carolyn's saying there's a practical problem that she has, which she can't do the work.
But not with that, you don't care if it goes through 2 public reviews. I think what you're saying is we have a streamlined application, each one of those can't go through a public.
Yes.
Well,
Teach
yes,
well.
but that's what Jim is saying, and it's not that I don't agree with you. I'm not saying that I don't think the public should have an opportunity to comment on every single well. I'm just saying I can't do it.
There obviously is a a slanted lens is getting that through. Not, and what I kept seeing in my head is that this isn't everyone. I mean, when they come to you, you know where they're going to be. It's not like you're going to give them a permit, they're going to drill wherever they want. They've already looked at a piece of land, you know where it is. If that piece of land, on the first glance at their application, is within a certain distance from a, once again, developed area, platted subdivision, then it goes through that extra I process.
Is that what
If
you were
not, yes.
Am I misunderstanding what you said?
Sort of. A couple more comments. I think if the fees are set up properly, it'll help go to your department to cover that stuff. That's an administrative decision by someone else. And secondly,
If it doesn't go in the general fund,
that's
You never
That's where all that
stated
we could be here all night discussing that.
You don't see your permit money directly to your department?
not even any of it.
What did they say last month? We pulled in 60 grand in our department. We have one building inspector, and if you want your roof inspected, you better be able to wait till mid-February.
But you know, just going aside from this thing here, there's a couple of issues on this oil and gas thing. When you drill an oil and gas well, about 50% of the money that's spent is what's called tangibles. In other words, hardware. And this county has a 1% sales tax that goes to road and bridge. All of the equipment that comes in for this industrial stuff is exempt from that 1% sales tax. So over time, and Carol's been doing a lot of research in it, is that we may have to have an election to get that fixed. I don't think we should have to, but we might have to. And if we do, nobody can lose that election.
Let's fix it. Yeah.
You know, I've gone through several times and said, you know, why is everybody afraid of an election? Stick it to the oil companies? You can't win that one?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
You can't do it
Well,
by
we're getting off
resolution.
point here, though.
You just can't do it by resolution?
Well, I thought we
Nobody
could, but
seems to know.
apparently our attorney says
Well,
no.
That's
But
not
I've
really what
I've talked
happened.
to other
How was it
attorneys who say we
initially?
can do it through resolution.
Here's what happened. Initially, the commissioners approved a resolution that allowed the sales tax to go to the public for a vote. Within that resolution, they included all of the exemptions that are allowable by the state. Now, at the time they did it, they thought that they were encouraging business in the state. We didn't have the wind farms. We didn't have the oil and gas. They didn't foresee this. When I looked into it, the liaison between the Department of Revenue and local governments told me and gave me the state statute to back it up that we could remove those exemptions with a resolution. Another attorney told us that we could remove those exemptions with a resolution. I sent it to the county attorney, and he told me we'd have to have an election.
Well, what's the risk? That you get sued for passing a resolution?
Why are you telling me?
Well, that's my, I say do it.
He says,
What's the risk?
he says we have to have an election. I'm done.
Well, who would object to that? If it goes without objection, your resolution goes through and you start taxing the equipment.
His
In the end, though,
rationale was
it
that
doesn't
the Tabor law says we have to take it to election.
Whatever, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know how expensive it is.
Try one, if it doesn't work.
Yeah, then you have a vote.
But do we get,
I think about that advice.
My point is, it doesn't matter what, you know what I mean, what we think. At that point, we're dead in the water. The county attorney tells us, no, you can't do it. Then we can't do it.
do it anyway. Take it back to this, because I
Anyone
think
else need to hear this?
I might just make a point. Yeah, how you doing, Jim? Mr. Joe, Mr. Joe. You know, we've been fighting for these nice regulations and best practices. The MOU would incorporate that. And you can put in platted subdivisions, you have to burn the gas, whatever. And it's an agreement that the planning department can execute, and the biggest incentive you have to get the oil companies to agree is time. So if you give them the expedited path, you got everything the citizens want, I think. Not everything, but we got a lot. All right? You don't want to put that through a public review every well.
I'm not sure that it's a public review, but at some point the public needs to feel like they're still part of it.
Yeah.
Well,
that's not good.
I think the answer to this is if it is in the opinion of the planning department that there are considerations here that are greater than normal or whatever the word one is, then it will have to go to a public review.
If it's not in compliance.
If you don't comply with the, yeah. So my guess is that there's going to be somebody out there that tries this.
Sure.
And we'll have a hearing and they'll go through the thing.
Put it through the public review process and you'll win every other battle.
I guess my point was I just want to make sure that's thrown out there because I think there's a lot of folks that don't want to feel like it's just a well-oiled machine.
But
Because the implication and the impression will be is that somehow the industry got behind it and they're railroading stuff through.
Somehow
And I think
this
that's,
is it.
sorry?
The fix is in.
Yeah, I mean, the fix is in.
Although we've
That's just
had-
something
Yeah.
you may notice there's some mistrust left.
Well, that's why I think there should be an internal trigger process, so that it's not, nobody's asking, you were very defensive immediately because you thought you have to look at every single one.
Whose
And
desk do you think he's going to fall on?
well, yours, but it's, first thing you look at, you say, oh, this is here, fine. It's just a process, and then it is a checklist and a check, because out there, the windows care, the cows care. No, as long as they're not doing anything to endanger the county. But when you get closer to home, closer to the
now the
population,
$1,500
they
that you
have
charged
to be.
him on that
So
last
you can
application,
segregate it.
where does that $1,500 come from?
Special use permit,
Special
fee
use
schedule.
You can
Oh,
put
that's-
that right into
that's-
the MOU.
Okay.
You can say any platted subdivision must
And it's
comply.
Yeah, we can
It's just-
That's not, that's my point. One of the things about this in the
You didn't
MOU,
say anything.
I think we have to have a provision in there, a line item for a permit fee.
We've done a little research on that, and it should be
It should be
between
somewhere
3,000
around
to
that.
5,000.
I was going to say 5,000 and 7,500.
Gotta stay.
I'm just based on what other.
Yeah, $100
towns
is a little
have done.
light. I mean,
No, it's $100 for the pre-app meeting.
oh, okay.
1,500.
Currently it's $1,500, but we've got.
That was the other point I was going to make, other than sales taxes, we got to get these permits to reflect the amount of work that goes into it.
Well, we raised them not that long ago,
I was
but I
just-
don't think we anticipated. I
No.
mean, we're thinking special use, a kennel,
No.
something we didn't
You and I haven't voted
anticipate.
on that.
I was just
Well,
given an
yeah.
assignment to look at our fee schedule and see.
But for the oil and gas thing, I think we should have a set fee for it. And I agree with Carol, something in the $5,000 per well would be appropriate. And then the next question is, and this one doesn't refer to it yet, because we're going to have it go to a full special use review, and that is the permanent facilities.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you're going to charge for that. We need to think about that, because it would be more in line with what I would consider a building permit type of a thing, which is a percent of something.
Yeah, percentage of the improvements on the property or square footage you occupy or something. We have to come up with some formula that.
Circling
Yeah,
back to
improvements would be more
circling
dollars.
back to this, what's the thing that's missing for me, or at least the way I think, is the checklist.
I agree.
And once we have the checklist, and then we can back and forth these a little bit, I think we're almost home.
And we have a checklist that comes out.
We had
It's in the document.
we had a checklist in the document.
But that's for submittals, what they have to submit.
Well, that's basically what the checklist is.
Well, I tried to get to that in item 3 on the MOU. That's kind of that's pulling information off that checklist that came out of the regs. So, yeah. And most of this stuff is to alert emergency services, the reports they need, the site plan so they know what's going on the site, things of that nature. So,
I've got 2 things on here. On item 7, the water. You're saying you've got to go ask permission to do the sampling and analysis. At the very least, you should add a sentence in there that the results of the analysis should be delivered to the county in electronic form. I mean, I can come in and ask, can I test your well? You say yes. No one says I have to. But I notice in the regs from the Oil and Gas Commission that you talked about delivering the results in electronic. Put that in here as well. That's good.
And John, one of the things we heard at COGCC was some people don't want their well tested. And you have, we're saying you have to try and reach out to them and say, hey, if you want your well tested,
And,
we'll
and
do
if
it.
you,
Yeah.
if you go out to Grant's place and say, can I test your water, and he tells me to get lost or get shot,
We're not going to
that's
test
not
that
gonna do
well.
anything. But if you come up into the northwest,
Yeah.
and you come over to my place, and I say, get lost or get shot, they'll just go next door, and the guy next door is gonna say yes.
Yeah.
So,
So
and,
you
and
get
I
some-
understand that, I'm saying that the results should be made available, or given to the county in electronic form. The added benefit there is if I want to see what the water analysis is in my area, I can come in, I can go to public records, and
That,
I can look at it.
the application we did on Thursday has a condition of approval that requires that the results of any of the water testing they do be submitted to the Elbert County's Department of Health and Environment.
All I can say is a significant landowner, I can't imagine anybody would be so stupid that they wouldn't like the water to be tested.
Actually,
Now, I know there's a.
I met one of them
Well, here's
I
the
know what I'm going to do.
reason why you
There
might
are
have
people
someone
who
who wouldn't
do
want to
that.
do that, because once it's disclosed, and
You have
you
to
try to sell
disclose
that
it.
property, you have to disclose it, that you have problems with your well.
So they
So
know
some
that
people
they
go
don't
out there,
The other item, Richard, that I have an issue, and if you can explain it to me, that's okay. It's on page 3, paragraph 7.
You would, the amendment?
No, it's at the MOU. Page
Okay,
3.
thank you.
I have a thing for 7. I guess. I really don't like that last sentence. It shall not apply to any successor owner-operators of any wells initially drilled or operated by, nor shall this MOU be binding upon successors in the sign.
I think it should be.
I don't like that at all. I'm a wholly owned subsidiary of Big Gas. I come in, I get a permit, I sign this, and then I turn around and I sell it to a buddy Grant. He's no longer bound, and you've got some long-term things in here, the water testing, and so on and so forth.
I caught that too.
So that, I really have a problem with that statement.
No, typically, this stuff would run with the land. And almost everything in the
Well, here's the thing. This is not conveying an interest in land, it's a contract. Now, you know, it's not like a covenant, right, which runs with land.
Sort of, but on the
Now, what you can do is say that if in the permit, in our permit condition, is say something like if the operator assigns or transfer or otherwise transfers its interest, the permit is void unless the transferee executes an identical memorandum of understanding.
That will have the same effect of removing it. So, sure.
Yeah.
We did that when we were going through the regs, we were talking about change of ownership, and we put in some wording to ensure that that agreement carried forward to all subsequent owners, operators, whatever. And we need to make sure that this MOU and the addendum and the checklist carry forward from the moment they put bit to
You want to have a permanent transfer? Get these people in here to sign this deal.
Make it an easement.
That's fine, but it should be in here.
My only question would be, how do you revoke a permit that's already in production?
Well, this is again, one of these things where we got a little bit of a translation problem. I agree that all of the assigns should be subject to this thing, and I don't know the legal way to do it, but I agree with that. And typically in the oil industry, everything runs with the land. Now that I've said that, though, the concept here is, at least at this level, is for just basically the drilling of the well and the completion of the well. And then the permanent facilities become subject to something different. So once the well is drilled and completed, that's a relatively short period of time. So, but the well is going to exist for 50 years. So what we've got this set up here to do is basically the way it's written, if I understand it right, this is how you initiate activity. It doesn't talk about what happens after the activity has come from being, yeah.
Well, what if they permit the well and then sell it?
Well, they're going to sell it. I guarantee.
No, I mean before they drill it.
They will. There's going to be lots of those. In fact, I've had 2 or 3 calls from people in the county that said, Grant, I've got 2 leases here to pick from. One's with company B and one's with company Z. They said, well, which one should I take? I says, well, which one do you like the least the best of? They says, no, I asked you which company's the best. I says, it doesn't matter which company it is because that lease becomes a marketable paper.
Yeah, but a lease is an interest in real property that runs with the land.
Yes.
You know, that's the difference. A contract between, you know, Elbert County and Chesapeake isn't an interest in land. It's a contract between those two parties. Now, if Chesapeake were to merge with somebody, then the contracts might go along with that. But if they're selling their interest, then that's. I mean, you could. I mean, there's a way we could figure this out.
Yeah, I'm not sure that you can. You know, let me. You get the legal smarts on it. I can't stop an owner-operator from selling his interests.
At any time.
At any time. Just can't do it. But if the guy I'm selling to says, I ain't signing that, we still can't stop this guy from selling his interest. Well's up and running. None of the MOU provisions prevent or exist, so.
Are permits
Correct.
transferable? Are they transferable to anybody? Isn't that the issue? Just don't make the permit transferable unless the agreement's in place.
I think there's a way to word it.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
Exactly. In here to accomplish
But
that.
if you have land that's encumbered by something, whether it's moving a fence over a property line or something, isn't it not pertinent with land anymore?
Yeah, but that's an interest. That's an interest in real estate.
This is not a property interest.
This isn't exactly.
Yeah.
It's a contract
But I
between
mean,
Elbert County
it's the
and
same
the producer.
basic concept though.
I don't know that it encumbers the
How do we enforce that?
because this isn't like part of the lease.
No, it's not.
No,
You know, it's
it's to facilitate a permit.
that now.
I was going to say,
So
so to use that plot of land.
it's nothing
Well,
but
that's what the
So
permit
it's
is.
sublease, isn't it?
And the other thing about this is it has nothing to do with ownership.
That's right. It's
This has to do with no, it has to do with whoever's the operator.
And regulation by the county is my understanding. You guys are regulated.
But my point is, and this goes back to John's point, is who is, because most wells are not owned by the people that drill it in total. There may be 20 different people that are participating in, if you will, a partnership to cause the well to drill. The only people we talk to drill will be whoever's the operator of record.
The applicant.
The operator of record is.
So I
now you know what you could do. You know what you could do. You could if party A, the first operator or whoever they are, agrees to this, and as part of the agreement, it's incorporated by reference into the permit. So then it's as conditions of the permit. So that's how you do it. Yeah.
I think that's right. And
So-
therefore it lives forever.
And you don't have to say anything about certificate of signs. It's just they've agreed to put it in part of the permit. If they're selling their permit, if the permit, to the extent the permit is transferable, all of you can't carve out part of it.
Yeah, all these conditions.
Yeah.
Can we get one of the attorneys here to kind of draft some language for us
I
on that?
have a question. I know I came late to the party, but I saw that the only default remedy is termination of the MOU. Now, does that mean that they're still permanent, but that reverts to the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission regs? Or what? In other words, this is only as powerful as it is enforceable.
I think
How? And I heard specific performance.
the intent was if they sign this and don't follow it,
Right.
um,
You revoke the permit.
well, it's like any contract. You can go after them for that, can't you?
Well, you should put, no, you can't, no. This is silent as to any remedy that I saw, and I was looking to see if there was any.
Well, that's why we were talking about specific performance.
Right, so I would specifically put that in there, that you encourage encourage them to, if they've started and then they abandon their promises here, and they're in default, and then they don't cure within the 30 days or the reasonable time,
We can enforce specific performance.
or you can put in there, I guess, if you want, or that a liquidated damages clause. There's any number of things that you can put in here, and minimum of $1 million liquidated damages. Just so that they have an incentive not to violate that. It's a minimum, but then actual damages in addition to that. But a minimum liquidated damages of $1 million. That'll give them the incentive to follow along with these rules and not just not comply. But I really
No, I agree with everything you said there, except, and the exception is once the well is drilled, we don't want them to abandon the well.
Well, no, I'm talking about abandoning these best practices. I see what you're saying. You don't want it to just be because our permit got full.
The most dangerous set of circumstances could be, and I know I didn't say it is, but it could be, is that if you have a well there with a renegade operator, and I use that word because
no pun intended.
And that's the engineering side. Of course, I know
a renegade operator that doesn't follow the rules. What we really want, in a practical sense, I appreciate everything you said, and I'm not arguing with you at all, but we don't want the operator to say, fine, here's the keys.
We're walking away. Yeah, and I get that. I don't know anything about the engineering of it, so I defer to all of you guys. But I would definitely want to put some enforceability more than just this default that's silent as to remedies.
Yeah,
specific regulations. We said something to the effect that you don't follow the regulations, drill in Elbert County again, you're out. But
the damage may have already been done, and we're just left with a mess. So
$1 million may not be anywhere near enough.
Right, I'm just saying $1 million at least gives one pause to say, let's make it a closed loop and not the open thing or whatever it is, and just make sure that, whatever you think is appropriate in terms of, realistic carrots and sticks to use with your producers.
Could we impose on one of the attorneys here to suggest some language?
I'll tell you next week whether I'm motivated to do it.
That's fair.
But if we could, we do need some teeth in it, I agree. And if we can come up with some language to get that incorporated here.
Both attorneys to submit.
How we like?
Both attorneys.
Yeah, see?
I'd be happy to help. I love this county no matter what.
Jim, you had something?
Well, it kind of came to me as you were talking about this. At what point, and maybe it's been discussed, and I apologize because I will say the same thing with Clark, I'm late to the party here, but are we looking at the quality, not of the plan and the proposal, but of the applicant themselves? Where is that taken care of? Because there's a lot of difference between a certain renegade type of operation, what we call in the logging business, JIPO operators, and a solid national, international business that's coming in with good backing. And where is that being looked at?
Yeah.
Because just because they agree to this step, doesn't mean that they have any intention of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
We actually asked COGCC if we could deny an application based on the past performance of an operator. They basically told us no.
They clean up their act, they still get to.
Well, I mean, put it in another, say you got a land developer that, fully performed, in one setting, they come back and they say, well, give me another chance. If they comply with all the regulations, you're going to be in a position to say, no, you can't have your, you can't have
In a case like that, we could possibly withhold the building permit until they corrected the situation. That would be
but going forward,
Yeah.
So it's not different.
I don't know the answer to that, Jim. I don't know. I don't know COGC if they've had problems with the company in the past, if they require higher bonding or how they deal with that. I'm not sure.
Well, if you get the COGG to come out to help you enforce one of their rules.
That's why I want this attached to that form.
I agree with you.
2A.
If you have them to come out, they will make them. And because what happens is life becomes increasingly complicated. And
Next time they apply for a permit down there.
it just,
Although, here's an article from the Denver Post. It says drilling spills rise in Colorado, but fines are rare.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't count on the COGCC.
We know.
Anything.
Except to tell us we can't do what we want.
Yeah.
Count on that.
If you put
Pete,
too
yes,
much, if you put too much of a stick in this memorandum of understanding, then they'll go the other route. It'll take this off the table. Because they'll say,
you're
I'm
not
going
sure.
to bet $1 million on this. I'll take the chance on it.
Pay $1,500 and take them 6 months or more.
Well, you know, to me, the damage is part of it. I think liquidating. I understand. It's a pretty standard thing in contracts, first of all,
Okay.
in a lot of commercial contracts. But to me, the more important thing would be them agreeing to. And I don't know how I'm not committed in Colorado, but you know, if you put in a contract specific form it is a remedy, I would assume you have that.
Well, you know, it's an equitable remedy always, so it's after the contract is, you know, the terms of the contract are exhausted, but maybe putting a term in there to say that it's first choice, because, you know, the equity is always after the contractual terms have been exhausted or otherwise not complied with. So I would specific performance, you want to force the guy to comply with the terms, that's the specific performance.
Exactly, precisely.
And
There was all kinds of
I mean, that you just get a court order to do it. The guy's already not doing it for
Well,
his own best interest. So.
Well, but even if we had gone the regulation route, you know, an injunction would be our remedy. It's the same thing.
Yeah, so it's still, to me, it's just way too vague. I would try to hammer it out in terms of expectation with a damage clause that includes whatever it is that you're concerned about when someone walks away. If we have to hire somebody to make that place safe, that they pay all those costs.
Well, they pay a little bit of damage,
Yeah.
costs, attorney's fees, all that stuff.
Well, liquidated is just agreed to by the parties before any.
No, I understand.
So I just say actual damages is even more important because it'll cost the county or be a blight or whatever environmental impact that's negative when they do.
All right, where do we go from here?
Well, what I'd like to see is we've also got to pin down that major oil and gas facility. We've got to get language in our special use section of our zoning. So we need to actually draft the language that goes into zoning now. I wanted to see what you guys thought of this as a tool, first of all.
I think we're almost home except with, I want to see the checklist.
Hopefully we're
I
getting
want to
close
see the
now.
checklist.
Yeah,
Checklist.
good work.
I have one comment.
This group has been working on this over a year, I'll say.
It's
been
neat
very
that it got
good,
distilled
yeah.
to 3 pages. That's amazing. There you go.
Well, we say it's 3 pages, but if you read this thing, it's going to be several, maybe even hundreds of pages of documentation that they have to provide. It's pretty sneaky in terms of what each one of these things require.
They make them do all the work.
The
Explain.
Sylvester well had more than 300 pages of documentation they had to submit. I'm not kidding.
You read it all.
No.
But now
You did?
It wouldn't have meant anything to me anyways. But the engineer did.
On number 7, we're sort of getting back to what COGCC was talking about, their proposed changes to monitoring and baseline testing and that sort of stuff. Where they are now, where they require none. There's a voluntary 2 wells within a mile location. Same thing with what El Paso has. This one is way outside of that. And I'm wondering if we take off, let me just throw this out there for discussion. But if we take off the horizontal extent and terminus and go back to the mile radius around the wellhead.
I'm cool with that.
If
that's what you were saying.
I think that's what we intended.
If that may be more palatable, because I think we all want them to go this route. And we want to protect people's water within reason. And I think this has gotten a little bit beyond the reasonable part. I think if you make them test within a mile radius, that's a huge area. And if they're coming up near a subdivision or near a populated area, it's going to,
It's a lot of wells.
in grants or whoever said sneaky, but it's going to push them. Just say, wait a minute, that's a lot of expense for us. We need to really rethink where we want
No,
to start from.
I come to peace with it because if there is going to be any cross-contamination, the only place it can physically happen is in the vertical part of the well bore.
Well, except for Rick's
I don't
possibilities. I'll entertain discuss it.
Why not leave it as it is and put a limit as to how many as well? So I mean,
Or just to have it within a mile of the
COGCC
vertical.
says 2.
Yeah.
This doesn't say how many. Just give them, leave that same area, but say you gotta do 2.
Coming back to that 7 that's on that MOU that we're talking about.
Well, they gotta do 2 anyway.
Whole area
On
as
page
opposed
3.
to.
See you, Rick, thanks.
I think that the answer to the question here is where it says further this MOU shall not apply to any successor or operator. I would say it shall apply to all successor operators.
Right, and then it's incorporated into the permit.
There you go, yes.
It's now.
And you say this MOU will be deemed as incorporated by reference, and the permit would say, we hereby incorporate the MOU.
Because if there's a successor operator, he had to get that job somehow.
Yeah.
And the way to test that job is this operator assigns the operatorship to a new operator.
Exactly.
So I think it just shall apply to all. And then you're right. By then attaching it to the permit, then it gives it.
Yeah.
Should we set a meeting maybe for 2 weeks?
Come up with a checklist or maybe some language for the,
I can try to, yeah, 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks.
Here. Okay. That's what I'm saying.
We just knocked down one problem, saying the triggering criteria for when this adds more daylight. I think is important. I mean, I think you just heard this. It's an important consideration. And so we need to have something very well written to trigger it, but also to keep people from being swamped.
Well, the triggering mechanism is the adjacent or left land use Is there a platted subdivision? Either is the well within a platted subdivision or within a certain distance from a platted subdivision? I mean, that's your triggering. That's what you're talking about.
It's just a question. Maybe it is that notification thing or something, but it has to be something that works the same for everyone, that doesn't cause you to have to go through a lot of extra stuff.
Well, that's why I've said that, is that if we say they have to notify everyone in a subdivision, if anyone in the subdivision is affected, that effectively involves the public, because once they're notified, they know who to call and put their comments in. So we're going to take those into consideration when we.
We can use that as the
You see what I'm saying? But it doesn't necessarily trigger a public hearing. It just depends on what it is.
I mean, maybe it should just, and maybe this is, once you've done something and everything works well and all the operators are responsible, doesn't mean we can't go in the future and resend this. If we don't have it, then there's a lot of issues out there.
Well,
I guess
we should try that in the way, but the reality is every time you get close to a subdivision, you're going to have somebody who's going to comment negatively, and if that's.
Carolyn, most of this is about appeals.
I understand that, and I agree with it. You guys aren't getting it. The reality is, I cannot do this. I cannot do it. There's only so many hours in a day.
as far as our next meeting,
And it-
talk to you about it.
It's quickly picking up speed, and when I talk to these other jurisdictions, I'm blown away. They're talking 5 to 7 applications every single month they're getting.
No,
I cannot do that.
Alright, so
We're not getting that quality yet, but I was just hoping to get 5 in the spring. All of us.
that works?
I didn't hear what you said.
November 13th?
Well, what are we gonna do at the 13th?
And now,
My house is gonna close.
Your house? Oh, we're gonna meet at your house.
That's okay. I didn't tell you guys about some sale house.
Yeah, you told me you
Put the house on the market on Wednesday. On Monday, I had 21 showings. I had 4 offers, 3 for above asking. By Friday, I had backup offers. Here's my original offer that my realtor used as leverage, and the original buyer waived every inspection item and the appraisal.
It's just pathetic how terrible the economy is.
So
It was unbelievable.
so you're going to sell that open bid?
I will never lose that realtor's phone number.
expect to accomplish on the 13th?
Yeah, let's,
The changes that we talked about.
we'll get those done, but the checklist, I think, specific items that we're gonna require,
The special conditions.
special conditions.
Wow.
Special
that-
consideration.
Yeah, special
Considerations.
consideration, might be a better way to put it.
Um,
We also need to look at the language that actually
Major,
goes in
minor.
zoning.
we wanted
I don't know if we'll have all that done in 2 weeks, to be quite honest, the zoning language, I
Well,
don't have it done.
Let's get this done.
You know what, maybe
Differentiate
let's set a
major,
realistic
minor.
schedule so we don't have to cancel the meeting.
Yeah, let's do
I mean,
that.
'cause that's our pattern, has been setting the meeting and then canceling it.
Yeah.
So what's realistic for you guys?
And you have, what about the regulations? Is that what you're calling a zoning regulation?
No, what I was talking about is what we need to do to amend the zoning regs to get this incorporated.
I mean, because it would also be nice, you know, we just saw these tonight, and I still haven't had a chance to really read them. So, and I understand the pressures on it, but it'd be nice to have them at least a couple of days in advance.
Yeah.
So what's a reasonable lead time for you to do
Well,
all
maybe
that?
we don't try to address the zoning regs just yet. Maybe we just make the changes to the MOU, incorporate the language that we've talked about, differentiating between major and minor, and then once we've got this, our ducks in a row on this document, then talk about taking our draft regulations and performing surgery on them and pulling out the pieces that we would like to incorporate into zoning.
Yeah, because there's not going to be time to do
Yeah,
that.
Carol's actually, yeah, hit something. You know, we've probably got a year before we have to worry about the majors. So let's get this minor stuff done, and then we'll pile that one. I think we should do it sequentially rather than all at once.
So this, my understanding from what you said earlier tonight is this sort of bifurcated or alternative process is meant to apply only to the minor facilities.
Right.
Is that right? Not to majors.
Yeah.
So, and that was to me that from what I was able to read in this, it wasn't explicit.
Although the majors
You're
would
right.
probably be a special use,
Right.
the way we're leaning.
I think that's the saving grace.
So this needs to be.
Well, that doesn't mean we couldn't take this
That's the
language.
protection.
Yes.
We couldn't take this language and put it in the special use part of, in fact, that's how
That's
they've
where it
done.
probably needs to go.
Yeah, that's how they've done a lot of things like communication towers and stuff.
And that's
Put it in
what-
a special use part of the zoning regulations, but it is specific to that special use.
To the major oil and gas.
Yeah.
Right.
I have one other question. What's our target date for getting this in front of you? I mean, we gotta have some sort of.
You want like concrete dates or something?
No, I don't want a concrete date. Unless it's concreted all the way on the outside.
To 100 feet below.
I mean, are we talking January?
14,000 feet of concrete.
If we approve this today, if we had a consensus, this is what we want to go today, we're at least 90 days out.
That's,
By the time we do the notification.
so,
That's my plan.
so we're 90 days out from whatever time we get this thing.
And that's 90 days till the first hearing.
See, now that's exactly the sound the oil and gas companies make when we tell them they have to do a special use.
Yeah, but unless we get it done, they're never gonna complain.
No, because then they write it up, and then they would have to put the notification out. So we're talking about that's probably going to take 60 days, unless you had an odd month or something. And then after that's gone through at least one planning commission hearing, and I might suspect is it'll probably take 2. And then from there, assuming that we make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to approve it, then there's another 2 or 3 weeks. No, there's between the Planning Commission
21 days.
21. So there's another month.
Sure.
So yeah, like I said, if God Himself approved this today, we're still looking at 90 days.
I gotta ask a crazy question now.
Why?
Why not? Is there any way, when we get this package done, of at least posting that as a draft to start
Oh, sure.
to get the.
Oh, we absolutely will do that.
Yeah.
So
Once we get it signed,
90
we
days,
get it out.
90 days is a public hearing.
That's
Say,
at least 2 public hearings. That's one at the Planning Commission
Here's
level and
here's
one
the
at
deal.
one at
Right.
the county commissioner level.
We
Yeah.
have to do a 30-day notification for the planning commission, because it's been so long since the planning commission heard it, okay? During that period, we can certainly post it and take comments from the public. Then you do the planning commission hearing, and it's 21 days before we could go to the BOCC.
So realistically, we're talking second quarter of 2013.
At least.
Yeah, at least.
Because the more, I tell you, the more you put out before.
And even if that's the case, we're going to have to do something.
That is correct.
That's why it's insane.
Would you like to see it sooner? Is that what you're?
Well, yeah, I think you got one permit already, and they're operating under a different set of rules.
Yeah. Although they did.
Well, I'll tell you that
They followed the
this
draft
application,
Yeah,
this
okay,
application,
but
there
Next
They're out
are
there to test well.
there are no
Yeah.
conflicts with our draft regulations with this well, okay? But a big reason for that is because it is so remote. However,
The second one.
Renegade is in, we have not accepted it yet. That's a whole nother story.
Hey, if we're doing it by the word,